He was already there when it began. No one saw him move in. No truck, no suitcase, no noise from the stairwell. One morning, he was just there, sitting on the bench outside the building like he'd always belonged. Tall, thin, older. Wore a faded trench coat and rested a worn briefcase on his knees. He didn't smoke, didn't scroll through a phone, didn't speak. He simply sat, back straight, hands folded neatly, eyes fixed somewhere just above the horizon. At first, it was easy to ignore. The city had no shortage of strange, still people. But the days went by, then weeks. He didn't leave, not once. You left for work in the morning, he was there. Came back late, still there, in the exact same spot, same posture, no change in clothing, not a blink out of place. The strange part wasn't just his stillness. It was that no one else seemed to notice. Neighbors passed by without glancing at him. Dog walkers, delivery men, families with strollers. Not a flicker of reaction. Like he wasn't there at all. Like you were the only one seeing him. You started watching. Morning coffee by the window. Late night walks, phone in hand, pretending to check the weather. He was always there. And always, somehow, facing your side of the building. One evening you went down and walked past him, slowly, deliberately. Up close he smelled faintly of rust and mold. His skin was pale, stretched tight, too smooth. His eyes didn't track you as you passed. But when you turned back, he raised his hand, slowly, deliberately, and pointed upward. Directly at your window. Then he lowered his arm and didn't move again. You didn't sleep that night. At 2:13 a.m., you went to the window. The street was quiet, empty, but the bench wasn't. He was still there, sitting, staring, and this time, he was looking straight at your window. The bench was empty the next morning. For the first time in weeks, the familiar silhouette wasn't there. No coat, no briefcase, no motionless figure watching the building. You stared through the window for a long time, waiting for him to reappear from some blind spot. But the street remained still. Eventually, you stepped outside and walked past the spot, half expecting to feel the same chill in the air that usually clung to that section of sidewalk. But there was nothing. The bench was just a bench again. At first you told yourself it was over, that he'd moved on or been removed, or that it had never been anything worth worrying about to begin with. But even as you tried to force the relief, a part of you noticed something off. That strange pressurized silence just inside your apartment door when you came home. The faint metallic smell in the hallway that hadn't been there before. You started checking the locks more often, turning on lights as soon as you entered a room, listening to the walls. A few days later, you found the footprints, faint impressions in the thin layer of dust that collected near your apartment door. Not yours, too long and narrow. 5 prints, all pointed inward toward your door, with the last one pressed right against the frame, as if someone had leaned in and stood there for a long time. You stared at them for what felt like minutes, then opened your phone and took a photo. That night, you barricaded the door with a chair. In the morning, the prints were gone. Not faded, not smudged, gone, as though someone had wiped them clean. Then came the sound. It started faintly, a subtle creak in the ceiling just above your bedroom. It didn't match the usual groans of plumbing or shifting walls. This was slower, more deliberate, like footsteps. One step, then a pause, another closer to the window, then stillness. You lay frozen under the covers, waiting for it to stop, but it didn't stop. It circled back directly over your bed and stayed there for a long time before receding. The next morning, still running on adrenaline, you went to the building office. You asked, casually at first, about the apartment above you. They pulled the file. Unit 6C unoccupied. Had been for 2 years, undergoing renovations. Stripped down to bare concrete and insulation. No keys issued. No workers scheduled in weeks. You thanked them, said nothing more, and walked out with your pulse in your ears. That evening, just before sunset, you climbed the last flight of stairs to the 6th floor. The hallway felt colder, though the heating was on. The door to 6C had no number plate, only a faint rectangle where it used to be. A strip of cracked security tape crossed the frame. It looked old, yellowed with age, still sealed, except for a single slit directly over the latch, like a box cutter had sliced through it from the outside. You stood there for a long moment, staring at the tear in the tape. You told yourself to turn around, to go back downstairs, to stop thinking about any of this. But then your eyes caught something else, a faint set of marks scratched into the painted wood near the handle, barely visible unless the light hit just right. 7 letters, etched shallowly, but clearly, "He's up." For a few days you avoided the 6th floor. You kept your routines mechanical, up at 7, out by 8, back by 6. Lights on early, curtains drawn tight. You checked the photo of the footprints more often than you admitted. The creaking in the ceiling stopped. The hallway seemed quiet again. A fragile sense of order returned, but it didn't feel real. It felt like the silence that comes right before something breaks. Then, without warning, you began noticing small changes inside your apartment. Subtle at first, the edge of a picture frame slightly tilted. A kitchen cabinet left ajar when you were sure you'd closed it. A strange smell near the hallway closet, faintly sour and earthy. One night, the bedroom door creaked open slowly while you lay in bed. You told yourself it was the air pressure, the old hinges, but you didn't sleep afterward. You just stared at the dark rectangle of the open door until morning. The next afternoon, you came home and found something you hadn't expected, his briefcase, sitting neatly beside your coat rack just inside the door, the same one he always held on the bench. You didn't open it. You didn't touch it. You backed away, left the apartment, and walked aimlessly for over 2 hours, heart-hammering, until it got dark. When you finally came back, the briefcase was gone. That night, you locked the door and pushed the dresser in front of it. You checked every window. You turned on every light. At 3:12 a.m., the hallway light clicked off on its own. Then the bathroom light, then the one in the kitchen. The bedroom light lasted the longest. When it finally flickered and died, you didn't get up. You stayed frozen beneath the covers, breath shallow, ears straining. There were footsteps, not above, not outside. Inside, slow, steady, crossing your living room. You didn't scream, you didn't move. You knew somehow that if you acknowledged it, if you recognized it, it would come closer. The steps stopped just outside the bedroom door. Then silence. You must have fallen asleep from sheer exhaustion or lost consciousness, because you woke up at dawn, drenched in sweat, light bleeding through the blinds. Everything was quiet. You walked through the apartment. Nothing was out of place. No signs of entry, no footprints, no smell. But on the inside of the front door, carved carefully into the wood at chest level, was a new message. Simple, deliberate, precise. He sits when you sleep. Apartment 12 had always been empty. That's what people said, calmly, matter-of-factly, as if the fact itself had settled into the bones of the building long ago. The door was always closed, its scratched surface marked by a faded "Do Not Disturb" sticker, the lock old and untouched. No lights, no smells of food, no footsteps. Occasionally a faint noise would escape, the soft creak of aging wood, the thump of something shifting deep inside, but everyone ignored it. That was the rule, spoken or not. You first heard about it from the neighbor across the hall. Years ago, an older man had lived there, kept to himself, no visitors, no trouble. Then one day he vanished. No one saw him leave. After a week, when the smell of running water reached the hallway, maintenance broke the lock. The apartment was empty. No body, no suitcase, just a dim nightlight still glowing in the corner and a tap running slowly in the kitchen. Since then, Unit 12 had stood untouched. It wasn't up for sale. No real estate signs, no repairmen, no paperwork. It was just ... there. Present like a closed book you're told not to open. You lived on the other side of the wall. At first you paid it no mind. Every old building has its strange room. But then the noises began. Late at night, between 2:40 and 3:10 a.m., you started hearing voices, faint and distorted, as if filtered through water or an old cassette tape. Sometimes a steady drip, unnaturally rhythmic. Sometimes a rustle, like paper dragging across the floor. You told yourself it was the pipes, or maybe the tenants upstairs, but the timing was too precise. The sounds never came during the day, only during that thin slice of night, when the city seemed furthest away. You set up your phone to record, left it by the shared wall overnight. When you listened the next morning, the audio was empty for hours, except at 2:51, when a voice emerged from the static, calm, measured, whispering, "Are you listening?" followed by the scrape of something moving across the floor. After that, you double-locked your door, left the hallway light on, slept in short bursts. The wall between you and Unit 12 no longer felt solid. At times you thought you could sense something moving on the other side, slow, deliberate, as though the apartment itself were shifting, inching closer. And then, one night, you woke up, not in your bed, not even in your apartment. You were lying on a warped linoleum floor, surrounded by darkness thick with the smell of mildew and dust. Your fingers brushed over peeling seams in the flooring. You felt along the wall, found a switch, flipped it. Nothing, no light, only silence. You stood up, took cautious steps through the stale dark, reached a door. The plastic veneer was old and cracked, the color faded to gray. Your hand found the metal numbers nailed into the surface point 12. The door wouldn't open, not outward, not inward. It felt like it had no hinges at all, like it had been set in place only to be permanent. You stood in the dark for several minutes, hands still resting on the cool metal number. No windows, no sounds from outside, just the thick air and the distant scent of old wood, dust, and something more sour, like damp fabric left too long in a sealed space. Eventually your eyes began to adjust. A hallway stretched ahead, short, narrow, lined with patterned wallpaper that had faded into a gray-green smear. The floor was soft in places, spongy underfoot, and sticky in others. Each step peeled faintly away from the linoleum. The apartment seemed impossibly deep, larger than it should have been, as if it extended beyond the dimensions of the building you knew. And worse, nothing looked lived in, but nothing looked abandoned either. Everything was simply paused. You passed a coat hanging on the wall, long, beige, covered in dust, but still neatly buttoned. Beneath it, a pair of worn slippers positioned evenly on the mat, like someone had just stepped out of them. The silence was total, but felt stretched thin, as though sound was being suppressed rather than absent. Even your breath seemed quieter here, absorbed into the walls. In the kitchen, the tap was dripping, not quickly, once every 4 seconds. The sound was loud, sharp, far too distinct in the heavy air. A bowl sat in the sink, still damp. On the table beside it, a single white plate, a fork placed precisely across it, and a folded napkin with a dark, oily stain that spread like a slowly blooming flower. You didn't touch anything. You just stood there and stared, trying to make the shapes fit into something rational, but none of it felt like memory. None of it felt like the past. The hallway ended in a doorless threshold. Beyond it, the living room, pale walls, a couch with a heavy blanket thrown over it, as if someone had been sleeping there regularly, an unplugged television facing nothing, a calendar on the far wall turned to a month that didn't exist. You walked closer, trying to read the faded print. The numbers were uneven, days repeated. There were 34 in total. You turned back toward the hallway. Instinct, fear, something primal pushing at the back of your mind. And there, at the far end, beside the door you had tried before, something was sitting on the floor. You didn't hear it arrive. It hadn't been there before, but now it was hunched, motionless, facing away from you, its outline sharp in the dimness. You couldn't make out its features. You couldn't even tell if it was a person. It didn't move. And then, just as you stepped back, something changed. The lights came on, not all at once, bulb by bulb, in sequence, from the end of the hallway to where you stood. The space was suddenly too bright, too colorless, every flaw in the wallpaper and every stain in the carpet exposed. The thing by the door was gone. Nothing remained where it had been sitting, not even an impression on the floor. That was when you realized the layout of the apartment had changed. The kitchen was no longer to your left. The couch had shifted to face the opposite wall. The hallway had gained an extra door. You hadn't heard anything move. You hadn't looked away. But something had rearranged itself while you were still inside. And just beyond the new door, a shape waiting. You didn't approach the new door. Something about it felt wrong in a way you couldn't articulate. Not threatening, not dramatic, just fundamentally unacceptable. The shape beyond it didn't move, but you knew it was aware. You felt it in the temperature of the air, the subtle pressure inside your skull, like the building had exhaled and left you standing in the lungs. You turned away, not out of courage, but because your body chose survival over curiosity. You backed into the hallway, now longer narrow than before, and began retracing your steps toward what should have been the front door. It was gone. In its place was a blank wall, painted the same pale color as everything else, no seams, no handle. You pressed your hands against it, tested the corners, tapped for hollowness, solid, seamless. That's when the apartment began to hum. It was low at first, more of a vibration than a sound, like something large and distant turning beneath the floor. Then the lights flickered. The air seemed to pulse in time with your heartbeat. You heard something slide across the floor behind you. Not fast, not loud, just enough to confirm you weren't alone. You ran or tried to. The space didn't behave. The hallway didn't connect where it used to. Rooms bent into one another like folded paper. Doors led into the same place twice. Furniture rearranged itself just out of sight, but always left traces. A warm patch on a cushion, an indent on the carpet, a freshly unrolled towel on the floor. Eventually you stopped moving. There was no point. The apartment wasn't letting you leave. But worse, it didn't seem interested in harming you either. It was observing, waiting, rearranging itself around your presence like it was adjusting to fit a new occupant. You found yourself back in what might have once been the bedroom. A small bed, no sheets, a single chair in the corner, a mirror that reflected the room accurately but refused to reflect you. You sat down, not from fatigue, but because the apartment wanted you to. You could feel it. The chair was placed exactly where it needed to be, as though everything else had been positioned to bring you here. On the knitstand, a folded piece of paper, one line written in small, cramped lettering. You're the sound now. As you read it, the humming stopped. The light returned to its steady tone. Somewhere deep inside the walls, a voice began to whisper, quiet, crackling, like a detuned radio catching fragments of speech. You couldn't make out the words, but they were yours. You were hearing yourself. You were the recording now. Outside the door, not the front door, but a new one you didn't recognize, you could hear footsteps, slow, measured, as if someone else had just woken up in your apartment, as if they had rolled off your bed, padded toward the door, and paused to listen. And in the silence that followed, you realized something chilling, final, and absolutely true. The apartment had never been empty. It was always waiting for someone to replace the last voice.